Millionaire offers $1 million to a poor woman for 1 week to play his fiancée. She says, yes, but what she discovers about his family will change everything. Hey everyone, before we start this incredible story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Help us grow on YouTube. Your support means everything to us. Now let's dive into this story. The pristine marble floors of the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Isabella Rodriguez pushed her cleaning cart down the opulent hallway. At 28, her once bright dreams had been replaced by the harsh reality of scrubbing toilets for Hollywood's elite. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her uniform hung loosely on her thin frame. She'd been skipping meals again to save every penny. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Children's Hospital. Ms. Rodriguez, Emma's treatment cannot be delayed much longer. Please contact our billing department immediately. Isabella's hands trembled as she read the message. $1 million. That's what they needed to save her 8-year-old daughter's life. $1 million she would never have. She was so lost in her despair that she almost missed the heated conversation coming from the presidential suite ahead. Sir, your grandfather is arriving from New York tomorrow, a man's voice said urgently. He's specifically asked to meet your fiancée. What exactly am I supposed to tell him? I don't know, Marcus. The second voice was deeper, filled with frustration. Maybe that she's traveling. Sick? Dead? Isabella froze. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, you've been lying to your dying grandfather for 6 months about having a fiancée. He's made it clear, no wedding, no inheritance, and we're talking about $2.8 billion here. You think I don't know that? The voice cracked with desperation. Look, I'll figure something out. I always do. Sir, you have 18 hours. Isabella heard footsteps approaching the door. In a panic, she grabbed her cleaning supplies and pretended to scrub the doorframe just as the suite door burst open. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit stormed out, his dark hair disheveled, his piercing blue eyes wild with stress. This was Alexander Sterling. She'd seen his photo in magazines. Behind him followed a shorter man in glasses, struggling to keep up. Maybe we could hire an actress? The assistant suggested desperately. An actress? Alexander stopped abruptly, causing his assistant to nearly crash into him. Marcus, my grandfather built his empire on reading people. He'll see through any performance in seconds. That's when Alexander's eyes met Isabella's. She was staring at him, her brown eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. Hope? Desperation? Excuse me, Alexander said slowly, studying her face. There was something raw and honest in her expression that he hadn't seen in years. How much of that conversation did you overhear? Isabella's mouth went dry. She could lie, keep her head down, go back to her invisible life of scrubbing floors while her daughter slowly died. Or, all of it, she whispered. Marcus stepped forward, alarmed. Sir, we should— $1 million, Isabella said suddenly, her voice stronger now. You need someone to pretend to be your fiancé. I need $1 million. Alexander stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. I'm sorry. What? My daughter is dying. The words came out in a rush now, 8 months of suppressed desperation finally breaking free. She has leukemia. The treatment costs exactly $1 million. I've tried everything. Loans, fundraising, begging, nothing worked. She stepped closer, and Alexander could see the tears she was fighting back. You need someone real, someone your grandfather won't suspect. I'm not an actress. I'm just a mother who would do anything to save her child. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Anything! The hallway fell silent except for the distant sound of classical music drifting from the hotel's lobby. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. Sir, perhaps we should— What's your name? Alexander interrupted, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. Isabella Rodriguez. Do you have any idea what you're asking? Isabella Rodriguez? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. "This isn't some romantic movie. My family, they're complicated." "Dangerous, even. More dangerous than watching your 8-year-old daughter fade away while you can't do anything to save her?" Isabella's voice broke. "I don't think so." Alexander studied her for a long moment. There was something about her desperation that mirrored his own, something authentic that he'd never encountered in his world of fake smiles and calculated moves. "1 week," he said finally. "You'd need to convince my grandfather that we've been together for months, that you love me, that you're planning to marry me. Okay. You'd have to live in my house, learn about my life, my family, my history, every detail. Okay. And if my family discovers you're lying..." Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Let's just say the Sterling family has ways of dealing with problems that disappear permanently." Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Sterling, if I don't take this chance, my daughter dies anyway. So what exactly do I have to lose?" Alexander felt something shift in his chest, a recognition perhaps of someone as desperate as himself. "Marcus," he said without breaking eye contact with Isabella, "cancel all my appointments for the next week." "Sir, are you certain about this?" Alexander extended his hand to Isabella. "Miss Rodriguez, you just made a deal with the devil himself. I hope you're prepared for the consequences." "Oi." As Isabella shook his hand, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows at the end of the hallway, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and cold, calculating eyes. Victoria Sterling smiled to herself as she disappeared around the corner. This was going to be more interesting than she'd anticipated. 24 hours later, Isabella stood before a pair of wrought iron gates that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. The Sterling mansion loomed beyond like something from a movie, all white marble columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and windows that gleamed like diamonds in the afternoon sun. Her hands gripped the handle of her single, battered suitcase. Inside were her 3 best outfits, a photo of Emma, and the hospital bills that had been haunting her for months. The intercom crackled to life. "Miss Rodriguez?" "Yes," she whispered, then cleared her throat. "Yes, it's me." The gate swung open silently, and Isabella walked up the winding driveway, each step feeling like she was entering another world entirely. Alexander was waiting on the front steps, but he looked different now. Gone was the desperate man from the hotel hallway. This Alexander Sterling wore confidence like armor, perfectly pressed navy suit, hair styled flawlessly, not a trace of vulnerability in his piercing blue eyes. "Welcome to your new home," he said, his voice cool and businesslike. "For the next week, anyway." Isabella nodded, suddenly feeling very small in her discount store dress. "Before we go inside, there are rules." Alexander began walking toward the mansion's entrance. "First rule, my grandfather, Harold Sterling, built his empire from nothing. He can smell a lie from across the room. So when you're with him, everything you say must come from truth, even if the situation is fake." They stepped into a foyer that took Isabella's breath away. The ceiling soared 30 feet above them, painted with cherubs and gold leaf. A crystal chandelier the size of her entire apartment hung from the center. "Second rule," Alexander continued, leading her past priceless paintings and marble statues. "My family will try to trip you up, especially my Aunt Victoria. She's calculating. Never trust anything she says." As if summoned by her name, a woman appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Victoria Sterling was breathtaking in the way that only money could buy. Platinum blonde hair in perfect waves, designer dress that probably cost more than Isabella made in a year, and a smile that didn't quite reach her cold blue eyes. "Alexander, darling," Victoria called as she descended, her heels clicking against the marble steps. "Is this our mysterious Isabella?" "Victoria, meet Isabella Rodriguez," Alexander said stiffly. "Isabella, this is my aunt, Victoria Sterling." Victoria extended a perfectly manicured hand, her eyes scanning Isabella from head to toe like a predator, sizing up prey. My, you're exactly what I expected. Nice to meet you, Isabella managed, taking the offered hand. Oh, the pleasure is all mine, dear. Victoria's grip lingered just a moment too long. I'm so curious to hear how you and Alexander met. He's been so secretive about your relationship. Isabella felt Alexander tense beside her. This was it, her first test. We met at a coffee shop, Isabella said, the lie flowing more easily than she'd expected. I spilled espresso all over his shirt. How wonderfully common, Victoria purred. And what do you do for work, sweetie? Isabella's mind raced. She couldn't say she was a hotel cleaner. I'm studying to be a nurse. I work part-time at a clinic. Alexander shot her a look. Impressed or alarmed, she couldn't tell. A nurse, Victoria repeated slowly. How noble. And you have a daughter, don't you, from a previous relationship? Isabella's blood ran cold. How did she know about Emma? Yes, Isabella said carefully. Emma is 8. And where is little Emma now? Surely she should meet her potential stepfather. She's at school, Isabella replied, her protective instincts flaring. And she's staying with her grandmother while we figure things out. Of course. Victoria's smile grew sharper. Well, I suppose we should let you two lovebirds settle in. Alexander, don't forget, grandfather's dinner is at 7 sharp. He's so excited to meet Isabella properly. Victoria glided away, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the feeling that Isabella had just been marked as prey. She knows about Emma, Isabella whispered once Victoria was out of earshot. Victoria knows about everyone, Alexander said grimly. She probably had you investigated the moment she saw us together yesterday. Should I be worried? Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Yes, but probably not for the reasons you think. He led her up the staircase to the 2nd floor, past portraits of stern-faced Sterling ancestors who seemed to judge Isabella with their painted eyes. This will be your room, Alexander said, opening a door to reveal a bedroom larger than Isabella's entire apartment. The bed alone could have slept 6 people, draped in silk that probably cost more than her car. It's beautiful, Isabella breathed. The closet is stocked with clothes in your size. Designer everything. Consider it part of the arrangement. Isabella turned to stare at him. How do you know my size? I told you, Victoria isn't the only one who does research. Alexander's expression was unreadable. I know you work at the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel. I know you live in a 1-bedroom apartment in East L.A. I know your daughter has acute lymphoblastic leukemia and needs an experimental treatment that insurance won't cover. Isabella felt like she'd been slapped. You investigated me. I investigated everyone who might try to take advantage of my situation. The difference is, you were honest about your desperation. That's more than I can say for most people. And what else do you know about me? Isabella's voice was dangerously quiet. I know you've been skipping meals to save money for Emma's treatment. I know you work double shifts whenever possible. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in over a year. Alexander's voice softened slightly. I know you're a good mother, Isabella. That's why I agreed to this. Isabella sank onto the edge of the massive bed, suddenly overwhelmed. This is insane. I can't do this. Yes, you can. Alexander sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. Look at me. Isabella raised her eyes to meet his. In 3 hours, you're going to walk into that dining room and convince the smartest, most suspicious man I've ever known that you're madly in love with me. And you know what? You're going to succeed. How can you be so sure? Because you have something everyone else in my life lacks, a real reason to be here. You're not after money or status or connections. You just want to save your daughter. Harold will see that authenticity, and he'll believe it. Alexander stood and moved toward the door. Get dressed. Wear the blue dress, 3rd from the left in the closet. And Isabella? She looked up at him. "When we're downstairs, when we're performing, I need you to touch me. Hold my hand. Look at me like you can't imagine being anywhere else. Can you do that?" Isabella thought about Emma's pale face in the hospital bed, about the machines keeping her daughter alive, about the treatment that could save her. "Yes," she whispered, "I can do that." Alexander nodded once and left her alone in the opulent room. Isabella walked to the closet and gasped. It was larger than her kitchen, filled with designer dresses, shoes, jewelry, more luxury than she'd ever seen in one place. She found the blue dress Alexander had mentioned, a stunning sapphire silk that felt like water between her fingers. As she held it up to herself in the full-length mirror, Isabella caught sight of her reflection. For just a moment she could almost believe she belonged here. But as she prepared to transform herself into Alexander Sterling's perfect fiancé, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to enter a game whose rules she didn't understand, with stakes far higher than just her daughter's life. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock chimed 5 o'clock. 2 hours until showtime. Bontelmeierhofstadt. Isabella stood before the full-length mirror, barely recognizing herself. The sapphire silk dress hugged her curves perfectly, and the professional makeup artist Alexander had summoned had transformed her into someone who looked like she actually belonged in this world. Diamond earrings, real ones Alexander had assured her, caught the light as she turned her head. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Alexander entered, and Isabella's breath caught. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that made his blue eyes seem even more intense. His dark hair was styled impeccably, and he moved with the confident grace of someone born into wealth. "You look—" He paused, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Perfect. I feel like I'm wearing a costume. In a way, we both are." Alexander approached slowly. "Are you ready for this?" Before Isabella could answer, he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "What are you doing?" she whispered, practicing. His hands came up to cradle her face gently. "When we walk into that dining room, we need to look like two people who can't keep their hands off each other." Isabella's heart began racing, but not from fear. Alexander's touch was surprisingly gentle, his thumbs tracing along her cheekbones. "Like this," she whispered, placing her hands on his chest. "Exactly like that." His voice was husky. "Now, when my grandfather asks how we met, you're going to tell him about the coffee shop." "But Isabella, add details. Make it real." She nodded, suddenly very aware of how close they were standing. "And when he asks about your family?" "I tell the truth. Single mother, daughter named Emma, working hard to build a better life." "Good." Alexander's hands moved to her waist. "He's going to test you. Ask about my favorite foods, my childhood, my dreams. I've written everything down for you to memorize." Alexander handed her a small card filled with handwritten notes. "Favorite color, forest green. Childhood fear, thunderstorms. First pet, a golden retriever named Maximus. Always orders his coffee black. Prefers jazz to classical music. Has a scar on his left shoulder from falling out of a tree when he was 9. Isabella studied the card, trying to memorize every detail. "This feels so intimate, like I'm learning your secrets." "You are," Alexander said quietly. "For the next week, you'll know me better than anyone else in this house." Another knock interrupted them. "Mr. Sterling, your grandfather has arrived." Alexander stepped back, and Isabella immediately missed his warmth. "Showtime," he murmured, offering her his arm. They walked down the grand staircase together, Isabella's hand resting on Alexander's arm. She could feel the strength of his muscles beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. The dining room was magnificent, a table that could seat 20 people, set tonight for just 4. Crystal glasses caught the light from an enormous chandelier, and fresh flowers perfumed the air. At the head of the table sat Harold Sterling. Isabella had expected a frail old man, weakened by illness. Instead, she found herself looking at a silver-haired lion. Despite being 78 and supposedly dying, Harold Sterling radiated power. His steel-gray eyes were sharp and calculating, missing nothing as they swept over Isabella. Victoria was already seated, looking like a predator waiting to strike. "Grandfather," Alexander said warmly, "I'd like you to meet Isabella Rodriguez. Isabella, this is Harold Sterling." Harold rose slowly, his movements deliberate and graceful, despite his age. He took Isabella's hand and studied her face intently. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent decades commanding boardrooms. "So you're the woman who's managed to capture my grandson's heart." "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Sterling," Isabella replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Please, call me Harold. We're family now, after all." His eyes never left her face. "Tell me, how exactly did you and Alexander meet?" Isabella felt Alexander's hand find the small of her back, a gesture of support that somehow gave her courage. "It was at a little coffee shop in West Hollywood," she began, weaving the lie with carefully planted details. "I was rushing to work, not paying attention, and I completely crashed into Alexander. My espresso went everywhere, all over his white shirt." "And what did my grandson do?" Harold asked, settling back into his chair with obvious interest. Isabella glanced at Alexander, letting a soft smile play across her lips. "He laughed." "Can you believe that? Most people would have been furious, but he just laughed. And then he insisted on buying me another coffee to replace the one I'd spilled." "How romantic," Victoria murmured, her tone suggesting anything but romance. "We ended up talking for 3 hours," Isabella continued, feeling more confident now. "He told me about his work, his dreams of expanding Sterling International into sustainable development. I told him about my nursing studies, about wanting to make a difference in children's health care." Harold leaned forward slightly. "Nursing? How admirable. And you have a daughter, I'm told?" Isabella's protective instincts flared, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, Emma. She's 8 years old and the light of my life." "Where is her father?" Harold's question was direct, cutting. "He left when Emma was 2, Isabella said quietly. "It's been just the 2 of us ever since." "That must be difficult." "It's been the greatest privilege of my life," Isabella replied with complete honesty. "Emma is smart, funny, brave. She's taught me more about strength than anyone else ever could." Isabella noticed Harold's expression soften almost imperceptibly. "Alexander tells me you're quite protective of her," Victoria interjected smoothly. "It must be hard, trusting someone new around your child." Isabella felt the trap in the question, but met Victoria's gaze directly. "It was, at first, but Emma adored Alexander from the moment they met. She said he had kind eyes." Alexander squeezed Isabella's hand gently, and she realized he was impressed by her quick thinking. "Children are excellent judges of character," Harold observed. "They see through pretense immediately." "Yes," Isabella agreed. "They do." Harold studied her for another long moment, then turned to Alexander. "And when do you plan to make this official?" "Soon, grandfather," Alexander replied smoothly. "We want Emma to feel comfortable with the idea of a new family dynamic before we rush into anything." "Wise," Harold nodded approvingly. "Family is everything, Isabella. The Sterling name comes with tremendous responsibility, but also tremendous protection. Are you prepared for that?" Isabella felt the weight of his words, the unspoken implications about power and danger. "I understand that marrying Alexander means becoming part of something much larger than myself," she said carefully. "But I also know that love makes any challenge worth facing." "Love," Harold repeated, his sharp eyes moving between Isabella and Alexander. "Show me." "I'm sorry," Isabella blinked. "Show me this love you speak of. I've been married for 53 years before my beloved Margaret passed. I know what real love looks like." Isabella felt panic flutter in her chest, but then Alexander's hand found hers across the table. His fingers intertwined with hers, and when she looked at him, something shifted in his expression. "Isabella makes me want to be better than I am," Alexander said softly, his eyes locked on hers. "She sees past the money and the name and the expectations. When I'm with her, I remember who I was before all of this became my identity." Isabella felt her breath catch. There was something in Alexander's voice, something that sounded almost real. "And you, my dear?" Harold prompted. "What does my grandson mean to you?" Isabella looked into Alexander's blue eyes and found herself speaking from a place she hadn't expected. "Alexander makes me feel safe," she whispered. "For the first time in years, I feel like I don't have to carry everything alone, like someone actually sees me, not just as Emma's mother or as someone struggling to get by, but as me." The words hung in the air, and Isabella realized that despite being part of their performance, they felt more true than she was comfortable with. Harold Sterling smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all evening. "Well then," he said, raising his wine glass, "to love, the only thing worth more than money." As they toasted, Isabella caught Victoria's expression across the table. The woman's smile remained perfect, but her eyes had turned arctic cold. The game, Isabella realized, had only just begun. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through silk curtains and the distant sound of birds chirping in the mansion's gardens. For a moment she forgot where she was. The Egyptian cotton sheets were softer than anything she'd ever experienced. Then reality crashed back. She was living a lie in a billionaire's mansion, pretending to love a man she barely knew, all to save her daughter's life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Children's Hospital. "Emma asking for you. Treatment consultation scheduled for Friday. Time is running short." Isabella's chest tightened. Friday was 4 days away. She had to make this work. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Alexander. Instead, Victoria Sterling glided into the room, carrying a silver tray with coffee and pastries. She wore a cream-colored silk robe that probably cost more than Isabella's monthly rent, and her blonde hair was perfectly styled even at 8 in the morning. "Good morning, darling," Victoria purred, setting the tray on the bedside table. "I thought we should have a little girl talk." Isabella sat up, suddenly very aware that she was wearing one of Alexander's old T-shirts as pajamas. "That's very kind of you." "Oh, it's nothing." Victoria settled into the velvet armchair beside the bed, crossing her legs elegantly. "I just wanted to make sure you're settling in well. This house can be overwhelming for someone not used to this lifestyle." "Everyone's been very welcoming," Isabella said carefully. "Have they?" Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Well, that's lovely. Tell me, dear, what did you think of Harold last night?" "He's formidable, but kind. I can see where Alexander gets his intelligence." "Why, yes, Harold is brilliant. Built this empire from absolutely nothing, you know. Started with a single apartment building in Queens and turned it into a real estate dynasty worth billions." Victoria paused to sip her coffee. "Of course, the family bloodline means everything to him." Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that Harold is very traditional about family legacy. The Sterling name, the Sterling blood, it's sacred to him." Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. "I'm sure Alexander mentioned that, didn't he?" Before Isabella could respond, Victoria stood and walked to the massive walk-in closet. "I took the liberty of selecting today's outfit for you. We're having lunch with some of the family friends, the Ashfords, the Blackwells, the Montgomerys, old money families who've known the Sterlings for generations." She emerged with a stunning navy dress and matching blazer. "They'll want to know everything about you, of course. Your family history, your background, your pedigree." "My pedigree?" Isabella couldn't hide the edge in her voice. "Well, yes, darling. When you marry into a family like ours, People want to know who you are, where you come from, what your family tree looks like. Victoria's smile turned predatory. I do hope you have some interesting ancestors to discuss. Isabella felt trapped. I come from a working-class family. There's nothing glamorous about my background. Oh, but there must be something, Victoria pressed. What about your parents, your grandparents? Surely there's some family history worth sharing. My mother raised me alone. My father wasn't in the picture. My grandparents immigrated from Mexico with nothing but hope and determination. Isabella lifted her chin defiantly. If that's not good enough for your friends, then maybe I don't want to know them. Victoria clapped her hands together, delighted. Oh, my dear, you have such fire. I can see why Alexander is smitten. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. But between you and me, some of these old families can be quite particular about bloodlines and heritage. Isabella felt her temper flare. Are you saying I'm not good enough for Alexander? Heavens, no. I'm just preparing you for the questions you'll face. After all, the last woman Alexander brought home had such impeccable credentials. The last woman? Isabella's blood ran cold. Oh, didn't he tell you about Sophia? Victoria's eyes lit up with cruel pleasure. Sophia Blackwell. Beautiful, elegant, from one of the oldest families in New York. She and Alexander were engaged for nearly 2 years. Isabella felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Engaged? Oh, yes. The wedding was all planned. Cathedral ceremony, reception for 800 guests, honeymoon in the French Riviera. Harold absolutely adored her. Victoria leaned closer. She died in a car accident 6 months ago. Terrible tragedy. The room seemed to spin around Isabella. Alexander had been engaged. To someone else? Someone from his world, someone who belonged here. I can see this is upsetting, Victoria said, with false sympathy. But surely Alexander mentioned Sophia. I mean, you can't possibly think you're his first serious relationship? Of course not, Isabella managed, trying to keep her voice steady. Alexander and I have talked about our past relationships. Good. Then you know all about how devastated he was after Sophia's death, how he swore he'd never love anyone again, how he threw himself into work to forget the pain. Victoria's voice was honey-sweet poison. It's so romantic that you've helped him heal from such tremendous heartbreak. Isabella wanted to scream, to run, to escape this web of lies she'd walked into. Instead, she forced herself to smile. Love has a way of healing even the deepest wounds. How beautifully put. Victoria stood, smoothing her robe. Well, I'll leave you to get ready. Lunch is at noon in the garden pavilion. And Isabella? Yes? Do wear the diamond necklace Alexander gave you. The one in the jewelry box on the vanity. It will complement the dress perfectly. Victoria swept out of the room, leaving Isabella alone with her racing thoughts. She stumbled to the vanity and opened the jewelry box Victoria had mentioned. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace that probably cost more than her apartment. But tucked beneath the velvet lining, her fingers found something else. A photograph. With trembling hands, Isabella pulled out the picture. It showed Alexander with his arm around a breathtakingly beautiful woman with auburn hair and green eyes. She was everything Isabella wasn't. Polished, sophisticated, born to wealth. At the bottom of the photo, in elegant script, were the words, Alexander and Sophia, forever yours, S. Isabella sank onto the vanity stool, staring at the photograph. Sophia was gorgeous in the effortless way that only came with generations of good breeding and expensive education. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled How to Marry a Billionaire, and she was dead. Isabella's hands began to shake as Victoria's words echoed in her mind. Car accident, 6 months ago. Alexander had been engaged to this perfect woman, and now Isabella was here, pretending to be his new love. How could she possibly compete with a ghost? A sharp knock on the door made her jump. "Isabella!" Alexander's voice called. "Are you ready for lunch?" Isabella quickly shoved the photograph back into the jewelry box and grabbed the diamond necklace with trembling fingers. "Almost ready," she called back, her voice only slightly strained. But as she fastened the necklace around her throat, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking deeper into something dangerous, something that had already claimed one woman's life. And Victoria Sterling's satisfied smile suggested that Isabella might be next. Hey, demain. The garden pavilion looked like something from a fairy tale. White marble columns wrapped with jasmine vines, crystal glasses catching the afternoon sunlight, and a table set for 8 with the finest china Isabella had ever seen. She stood beside Alexander, the diamond necklace feeling heavy around her throat, trying to ignore the photograph of Sophia that was now burned into her memory. Alexander looked devastatingly handsome in a charcoal gray suit, but Isabella couldn't stop wondering if he was thinking about his dead fiancée. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant," proclaimed Eleanor Ashford, a silver-haired woman dripping in pearls who air-kissed Isabella's cheeks. "Alexander, you simply must tell us how you found such a treasure." "Isabella found me, actually," Alexander replied smoothly, his hand settling on the small of Isabella's back. "She literally crashed into my life." The assembled guests, 3 couples representing old New York money, laughed politely. But Isabella could feel their eyes cataloging everything about her, her dress, her jewelry, her posture, searching for flaws. "And what do your parents do, dear?" asked Charles Blackwell, a distinguished man in his 70s, whose last name made Isabella's stomach clench. "My mother works in healthcare administration," Isabella replied carefully. "She raised me as a single parent." "How modern," murmured Patricia Montgomery, her tone suggesting it was anything but a compliment. Victoria, resplendent in a cream silk dress, leaned forward with predatory interest. "Isabella's family immigrated from Mexico." "Isn't that fascinating? Such a different background from what we're used to in our circle." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Isabella's background is exactly what this family needs," he said coldly. "Real people with real values, instead of trust fund babies who've never worked a day in their lives." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. "Alexander," Victoria laughed nervously, "I was simply making conversation." "Were you?" Alexander's blue eyes were ice. "Because it sounded like you were questioning Isabella's worth based on her ancestry, which is ironic considering the Sterling fortune was built by my great-great-grandfather, who was a poor Irish immigrant." Harold Sterling, who had been quietly observing from the head of the table, nodded approvingly. "Well said, Alexander. Money doesn't create character. It only reveals it." Isabella felt a surge of gratitude toward Alexander, but also confusion. Was this part of their act, or was he genuinely defending her? "Of course," Charles Blackwell cleared his throat. "We meant no offense. It's just that after dear Sophia—" The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alexander's entire body went rigid beside Isabella. She could feel the sudden tension radiating from him, see the muscle in his jaw clench. "Sophia was a wonderful girl," Eleanor Ashford said softly. "Such a tragedy. What happened to her?" "Yes," Victoria agreed, her eyes fixed on Isabella with cruel satisfaction. "Sophia Blackwell was absolutely perfect for our family." "Wasn't she, Alexander?" Isabella watched Alexander's face transform. The confident man who had just defended her seemed to crumble inward, grief and guilt warring in his expression. "She was," he said quietly. "Such a beautiful wedding it would have been," Patricia Montgomery sighed. "The cathedral was already booked, the flowers ordered, and then that terrible accident." "Perhaps," Harold Sterling interrupted firmly, "we should focus on the present rather than dwelling on past tragedies." But the damage was done. Isabella could see it in Alexander's haunted expression, in the way his hand had unconsciously moved away from her back. "Tell us about your daughter, dear," Eleanor Ashford said, clearly trying to change the subject. Alexander mentioned you have a little girl. Emma, Isabella said, grateful for safer ground. She's 8, smart as a whip and braver than anyone I know. How lovely. And where is she today? She's... Isabella hesitated. She couldn't mention the hospital. She's with her grandmother. Will we get to meet her soon? Charles Blackwell asked. Children are so important to family legacy. Isabella felt trapped. Soon, I hope. Sophia always said she wanted children immediately after the wedding, Victoria said conversationally, twisting the knife deeper. She had such maternal instincts. She would have been a wonderful mother. Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. Excuse me, he said tersely. I need to make some calls. He strode away from the pavilion, leaving Isabella alone with the vultures. Oh, dear, Victoria said with false concern. I hope we didn't upset him. He's still so sensitive about Sophia's death. Perhaps you should go to him, Eleanor suggested kindly to Isabella. A man needs comfort from the woman he loves during difficult moments. Isabella excused herself and hurried after Alexander, her heels clicking against the stone pathways. She found him in what appeared to be a private garden, his back to her, staring at a marble fountain. Alexander? She called softly. He didn't turn around. They're right, you know. Sophia was perfect for this life. She knew how to handle people like Victoria, how to navigate these social minefields. She belonged here. Isabella approached cautiously. And you think I don't? I think you're real in a way that Sophia never was, Alexander said, finally turning to face her. His blue eyes were filled with pain. But real doesn't always survive in this world. What happened to her, Alexander? Really? Alexander was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. She discovered something. About my family. About me. He ran a hand through his dark hair. The night she died, she called me. She was scared, said she needed to tell me something important. She was driving to my apartment when the accident happened, when her brakes failed on a perfectly maintained car. Alexander's voice was bitter. Sophia was many things, but she wasn't careless. She had that Mercedes serviced every 3 months religiously. Isabella felt ice run through her veins. You think someone killed her? I think Sophia asked too many questions about the wrong things, and I think someone in my family decided she was a liability. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Alexander, Isabella whispered, what exactly did Sophia discover? He looked at her for a long moment, and Isabella could see him weighing how much truth she could handle. That the sterling fortune isn't as clean as everyone believes, that my grandfather's empire was built on some very dark foundations, and that some members of my family will do anything to protect those secrets. Isabella thought about Victoria's satisfied smile, about the way she'd orchestrated today's humiliation, about the photograph hidden in the jewelry box. Including murder? Including murder? Alexander confirmed grimly. A rustle in the nearby hedges made them both freeze. Alexander moved protectively in front of Isabella, his entire body tense. Who's there? He called sharply. Victoria emerged from behind a topiary, brushing leaves from her dress with theatrical casualness. Oh, there you two are, she exclaimed brightly. Everyone was wondering where you'd disappeared to. The Montgomerys are leaving soon and wanted to say goodbye. Isabella and Alexander exchanged a look. How much had Victoria heard? We were just having a private conversation, Alexander said coldly. Of course, darling. Young love is so precious. Victoria's smile was poisonous sweet. Isabella, dear, you look a bit pale. I hope all this talk about family history hasn't overwhelmed you. Oh, I'm fine, Isabella managed. Wonderful, because there's so much more family history to share. Isn't there, Alexander? Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. So many secrets and stories. I'm sure Isabella would find them absolutely fascinating. As Victoria sauntered back toward the pavilion, Isabella grabbed Alexander's arm. She heard us, she whispered urgently. I know, Alexander replied grimly, which means we just became very dangerous to some very powerful people. Yeah, maybe I should leave. Take the money and run before— No. Alexander's grip on her hand tightened. If you run now, they'll know we were on to something, and Victoria will make sure you never see Emma again. Isabella's blood turned to ice. What do you mean? I mean, my family has resources you can't imagine. If they want someone to disappear— Alexander's voice trailed off meaningfully. Isabella thought about her daughter, alone in a hospital bed, trusting her mother to save her life. She thought about the $1 million she needed, about the treatment that could cure Emma's leukemia. She was trapped between saving her daughter and possibly getting them both killed. So what do we do? She whispered. Alexander's expression hardened with resolve. We play their game better than they do. We make them believe we're harmless while we figure out what Sophia discovered, and we pray we're smarter than they are. As they walked back toward the pavilion, Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap that was about to snap shut around them. But for Emma, she would walk through hell itself. That evening, Isabella stood on the balcony of her room, staring out at the manicured gardens below. The diamond necklace felt like a collar around her throat, and Sophia's photograph seemed to burn in her memory. Every shadow could hide danger. Every smile could mask murder. Her phone buzzed with another message from the hospital. Emma's white blood cell count is dropping. Treatment window closing. Please advise on payment arrangements. Isabella's hands trembled as she typed back, Payment confirmed for Friday. Please proceed with treatment prep. She was lying. The money wasn't confirmed. Nothing was confirmed, except that she was trapped in a deadly game she didn't understand. A soft knock made her spin around. Alexander entered, carrying 2 glasses of wine, still wearing his dress shirt from lunch, but with the tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. He looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. I thought you might need this, he said, offering her a glass. Thank you. Isabella accepted the wine gratefully. This has been quite a day. I'm sorry about what happened at lunch. Victoria was deliberately cruel. Were you defending me as part of our act, or— Bimba? Isabella let the question hang in the air. Alexander was quiet for a moment, studying the wine in his glass. I've spent my entire life watching people tear each other apart with polite words and social poison. When Victoria went after you like that— He looked up, meeting her eyes. No one deserves to be made to feel less than they are, especially not someone as genuine as you. Isabella felt something flutter in her chest, something dangerous and real. You don't really know me, Alexander. For all you know, I could be just as manipulative as everyone else in your world. Are you? He asked directly. I'm here pretending to love you for money. How is that not manipulative? Because you're honest about it. Alexander moved closer to where she stood by the balcony railing. Everyone else in my life wants something from me while pretending they don't. You told me exactly what you needed and why. There's something refreshing about that kind of honesty. The wine was making Isabella's defenses lower. Is that why you chose me? Because I was honest about being desperate? I chose you because when I looked into your eyes that day at the hotel, I saw someone who understood what it meant to fight for something that mattered more than yourself. Isabella's breath caught. There was something in Alexander's voice, something that sounded almost— You're very good at this, she whispered. At what? Making it feel real. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. What if it is real? Isabella's heart began racing. Alexander, I know this started as a business arrangement. I know we're both here for practical reasons, but Isabella— His hand came up to cup her cheek. When I defended you today, when I see you with my grandfather, when you smile at me like you're doing right now, it doesn't feel like acting anymore. Isabella knew she should step away, maintain the professional distance that would keep her safe. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "Everything about this situation is dangerous." Alexander's thumb traced along her cheekbone. "The question is whether we face those dangers together or pretend we're still just playing roles." Before Isabella could respond, Alexander's lips were on hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was giving her a chance to pull away. When she didn't, when she instead pressed closer to him, the kiss deepened. Isabella felt herself melting into him, her hands finding their way to his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "Isabella," Alexander whispered against her forehead, "I need to tell you something." The serious tone in his voice made her stomach clench. What?" "I had you investigated before I made the offer, but what I found—" He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I know about Emma's medical bills. I know about your financial situation, but I also know things you never told me." Isabella's blood ran cold. "What kind of things?" "I know you've been donating plasma twice a week to earn extra money. I know you sold your engagement ring from Emma's father last year to pay for her initial treatment. I know you haven't bought yourself new clothes in 18 months because every penny goes to Emma's care." Isabella felt exposed, violated. "You had no right. I know you work 16-hour days and still find time to read to Emma every night. I know you've been learning Spanish medical terminology so you can better advocate for the Latino children at the clinic where you volunteer." Alexander's voice was intense, urgent. "I know you turned down 3 marriage proposals from decent men because you didn't want to burden anyone with Emma's medical expenses." "Stop," Isabella whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I know you're the most selfless, loving, fierce woman I've ever encountered. And I know that somewhere along the way, this stopped being about business for me." Isabella stared at him, emotions warring in her chest. "How dare you investigate my personal life like that? How dare you pry into my most private moments?" "Because I needed to know if I could trust you with my life." Alexander's composure cracked. "Do you understand what's at stake here? If my family discovers this is fake, if they realize what we're really doing, we could both end up like Sophia." "Then maybe this was a mistake," Isabella's voice rose. "Maybe I should take whatever money you've already given me and run." "I haven't given you any money yet." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. "What?" "The $1 million was contingent on successfully completing the week. If you leave now, if this falls apart—" Alexander's expression was pained. "You get nothing." Isabella felt the world tilt around her. "You're holding my daughter's life hostage. I'm trying to keep us both alive long enough to get what we need." Alexander grabbed her shoulders gently. "Isabella, please. I know this is complicated now. I know feelings are involved, but we have to see this through." "Feelings?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "What feelings? You've been manipulating me from the moment we met. You researched my life, my weaknesses, my desperation. You knew exactly which buttons to push to get me to agree to this insanity." "That's not—" "And now you're telling me you have feelings for me? How convenient. Right when I'm starting to question whether I can trust you." Alexander's hands fell away from her shoulders. "You think I'm manipulating you?" "I think you're very good at making people believe what you need them to believe. It's probably a family trait." The accusation hit its mark. Alexander's expression shuddered, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the cold businessman. "You're right," he said quietly. "Manipulation is a family trait. But so is survival. And right now, we need each other to survive the next 3 days." Isabella turned away from him, gripping the balcony railing. Below, she could see lights moving through the gardens, security guards making their rounds. "What happens on Friday?" she asked without looking at him. "Friday is when my grandfather plans to announce our engagement publicly. After that, the money transfers to your account, and you're free to leave." "And if I can't make it through the next 3 days? If I can't keep pretending to love someone who sees me as a chess piece?" Alexander was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Then Emma dies, and I lose the only real thing that's happened to me in years." Isabella closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over. "I hate you. I know. I hate that you investigated me. I hate that you know my secrets. I hate that you're making me choose between my daughter's life and my own dignity. I know. And I hate that, despite all of that." Isabella's voice broke. "I'm falling for you anyway." The confession hung in the air between them like a blade. Alexander moved behind her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Isabella!" "Don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. I can't handle any more revelations tonight." They stood in silence, the night air heavy with unspoken words and dangerous possibilities. Finally, Alexander spoke. "For what it's worth, the investigation stopped being about business the moment I met you." Isabella didn't respond, couldn't respond, because somewhere in the maze of lies and manipulation and desperate choices, she was starting to believe him. And that terrified her more than any threat from his family ever could. Isabella barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sophia's photograph, Alexander's haunted expression, Victoria's predatory smile. When dawn finally broke through the silk curtains, she felt like she'd been run over by a truck. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from the hospital and a text that made her blood freeze. "Emma's condition deteriorating. Experimental treatment must begin today or window closes permanently. Please confirm payment status immediately." Isabella's hands shook as she dialed the hospital. "Dr. Martinez speaking." "Doctor, this is Isabella Rodriguez. I got your messages about Emma." "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm going to be direct with you. Emma's white blood cell count dropped significantly overnight. If we don't begin the experimental protocol today, we'll lose our opportunity entirely. Her body won't be strong enough to handle the treatment if we wait any longer." "But the payment—" "The treatment costs $1 million, as we discussed. The pharmaceutical company requires payment confirmation before they'll release the drug. Do you have the funds available?" Isabella closed her eyes, thinking about Alexander's revelation that the money wouldn't transfer until Friday. Friday would be too late. I need a few hours to make arrangements." "Ms. Rodriguez, I can give you until noon. After that, we'll have to move Emma to hospice care." The line went dead. Isabella stared at her phone, tears streaming down her face. Hospice care. They were giving up on Emma. She had 6 hours to find $1 million or watch her daughter die. A sharp knock interrupted her panic. "Isabella," Alexander's voice called. "My grandfather wants to see you in his study. Immediately." Isabella wiped her eyes and threw on the first dress she could find. A simple black one that seemed appropriate for what felt like a funeral. When she opened the door, Alexander took one look at her face and frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing I can discuss right now." Isabella's voice was hollow. "Let's get this over with." They walked through the mansion in tense silence. Harold Sterling's study was a monument to power, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and windows overlooking the estate's sprawling grounds. Harold sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Victoria perched in a leather chair to his right, looking like a cat who'd caught a canary. "Sit down, both of you," Harold commanded. Isabella and Alexander took the chairs facing the desk. Isabella could feel Victoria's eyes boring into her, could sense the woman's barely contained excitement. "I've been doing some thinking since yesterday's lunch," Harold began, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Isabella. "About family, about legacy, about truth." Isabella's stomach clenched. "You see, my dear," Harold continued, "I've built my empire on my ability to read people, to see through facades and uncover reality. It's served me well for 78 years. "Grandfather," Alexander started, but Harold held up a hand for silence. Yesterday, when I watched you interact with our family friends, when I saw how you handled Victoria's provocations, I realized something important. Harold leaned forward. You're not what you appear to be. Isabella felt the walls closing in. They'd been discovered. It was over. You're better, Harold said quietly. Isabella blinked in confusion. I'm sorry? You're better than what you appear to be. Most people in your position would have either crumbled under the social pressure or fought back with ugly aggression. Instead, you maintained your dignity while standing your ground. That takes character. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. However, Harold continued, character isn't the only thing that matters in this family. Truth matters more. Here it comes, Isabella thought. This is where he exposes us. Victoria came to me this morning with some interesting information about you, Isabella, about your background, about your motivations for being here. Isabella's hands clenched in her lap. Beside her, she could feel Alexander tensing for a fight. She showed me hospital records, Harold said, his voice deadly quiet. Records indicating that your daughter is currently in critical condition at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Isabella's world tilted. How did you... I have resources, my dear. The question is, why didn't you tell us about Emma's condition? Isabella looked at Alexander, panic racing through her. Their cover was blown. Victoria had somehow obtained Emma's medical records, had discovered their deception. Isabella's voice failed her. Let me guess, Harold continued. You need money for her treatment, experimental therapy that costs exactly... He consulted a paper on his desk. $1 million. Isabella felt tears burning her eyes, but refused to let them fall. And my grandson, Harold's gaze moved to Alexander, offered you exactly that amount to pretend to be his fiancée for 1 week. The study fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Well, Harold demanded, is this accurate? Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. Yes, Victoria leaned forward eagerly, waiting for Harold's explosion of rage. Instead, Harold Sterling began to laugh. It started as a low chuckle, then built to full-throated laughter that echoed off the study's walls. Isabella and Alexander exchanged confused glances, while Victoria's face grew increasingly pale. Brilliant! Harold finally gasped, wiping tears from his eyes. Absolutely brilliant. Grandfather, Alexander's voice was carefully controlled. I'm not sure I understand. Don't you see? Harold stood and walked around the desk. For months I've been pressuring you to find a wife, to produce an heir, to settle down. And what do? You find the most genuine, loving, desperate woman in Los Angeles and convince her to help you deceive me. Isabella felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. You're not angry? Angry? My dear girl, I'm impressed. Harold's eyes twinkled with genuine mirth. Do you know how many gold-digging social climbers have thrown themselves at Alexander over the years? How many perfectly suitable but completely soulless women I've had to endure at family dinners? Victoria's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. But you, Harold pointed at Isabella, you're here for the most noble reason imaginable, to save your child's life. And Alexander, you brilliant boy, you found someone who sees past the money to the man underneath. But we're lying to you, Isabella said weakly. Are you? Harold's expression grew serious. Isabella, do you care about my grandson? Isabella thought about their kiss on the balcony, about the way her heart raced when Alexander defended her, about the genuine pain in his eyes when he spoke about Sophia. Yes, she whispered, more than I should. And Alexander, putting aside the business arrangement, how do you feel about Isabella? Alexander looked at Isabella, his blue eyes intense with emotion. I think I'm falling in love with her. Harold clapped his hands together, delighted. There you have it. Real feelings, real connection, real love, growing from the most unlikely circumstances. It's better than any fairy tale. But Harold, Victoria finally found her voice, they're deceiving you. They're using you. Victoria, my dear, Harold's voice turned arctic, I'm very curious how you obtained confidential medical records from a children's hospital. That's a federal crime, you know. Victoria's face went white as a sheet. In fact, Harold continued, settling back into his chair, I'm beginning to wonder if your sudden interest in exposing Isabella has more to do with your own agenda than with protecting family interests. I don't know what you mean, Victoria said, but her voice wavered. Don't you? Harold's smile turned predatory. Tell me, Victoria, what do you know about Sophia Blackwell's death? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. She died in a car accident. Everyone knows that. Yes, but did everyone know that Sophia came to see me the day before she died? That she had some very interesting questions about the Sterling family trust? Isabella saw Alexander stiffen beside her. Questions about inheritance laws, about what happens to the family fortune if it's discovered that the heir isn't actually, an heir. Grandfather, Alexander's voice was barely controlled. What are you saying? Harold Sterling looked at his grandson with something that might have been pity. I'm saying, my boy, that it's time you learned the truth about who you really are. The silence stretched until Isabella thought she might scream. Alexander, Harold said gently, you are not my biological grandson. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Alexander went rigid, his face draining of all color. What? Your mother, Sarah, had an affair? Your father, David, was sterile from a childhood illness? When Sarah became pregnant, she convinced David the child was his through some miracle. David, desperate for an heir, chose to believe her. Isabella watched Alexander's world crumble in real time. But I've always known, Harold continued. I had DNA tests done when you were born. You're not a Sterling by blood. Then why? Alexander's voice broke. Why did you raise me as your heir? Why give me everything? Because blood doesn't make family, Harold said firmly. Love does, loyalty does, character does. You've been more of a grandson to me than any biological heir could have been. But the inheritance is yours, completely and legally yours. I've had the lawyers structure everything to ensure that biological parentage is irrelevant. Isabella saw understanding dawn in Alexander's eyes. Sophia found out. And she made the mistake of sharing her discovery with someone she trusted. Harold's gaze moved to Victoria, someone who saw an opportunity to eliminate the competition and claim what she thought should be hers. Victoria stood slowly, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. You can't prove anything. Can't I? Harold smiled coldly. Brake lines don't cut themselves, Victoria. And security cameras are everywhere these days, including the parking garage where Sophia's car was sabotaged. Victoria's composure finally cracked. You have no idea what it's like, she screamed, watching you hand everything to someone who isn't even family while the rest of us get scraps. So you killed her, Isabella whispered, horror filling her voice. I protected this family's legacy, Victoria snarled. Sophia would have exposed everything, destroyed the Sterling name. I did what needed to be done. You murdered an innocent woman, Alexander said, his voice deadly quiet. And you were going to be next, Harold added calmly. Once Victoria inherited everything, I suspect you would have met with a similarly tragic accident. Victoria's eyes darted toward the door, calculating her chances of escape. I wouldn't, Harold advised. Security has been instructed to detain you until the police arrive. As if summoned by his words, 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Victoria Sterling was led away in handcuffs, her screams of protest echoing through the mansion's halls. When the study finally fell quiet, Isabella found herself staring at Harold Sterling with new understanding. You knew, she said. You knew about our arrangement from the beginning. I suspected. But I also saw something real developing between you two, something worth protecting. Harold smiled at them both. And now, my dear Isabella, let's discuss your daughter's medical treatment. Isabella's heart stopped. What about it? The money has already been transferred to Children's Hospital. Emma's treatment began an hour ago. Isabella felt the world spin around her. But how? The payment wasn't supposed to happen until Friday. My dear girl, Harold chuckled. Did you really think I was going to let a child die while you two played out your little romance? I'm not a monster. Isabella began to cry. Great, heaving sobs of relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. Alexander pulled her into his arms, holding her as she fell apart. Thank you, she whispered against Harold's chest when she could finally speak. Thank you for saving her. Don't thank me yet, Harold said seriously. Thank me when she's completely cured, which, according to her doctors, has an 85% success rate with this new treatment. Isabella looked up at him through her tears. What happens now? Harold Sterling smiled at her with genuine warmth. Now, my dear, you get to decide if you want to marry my grandson for real. Stern. 3 hours later, Isabella sat in the back seat of Alexander's Bentley as they raced through Los Angeles traffic toward Children's Hospital. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, which had been buzzing with updates from Dr. Martinez. The treatment is responding well, Alexander said, reading over her shoulder. Emma's vitals are stabilizing. Isabella nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After months of desperation and fear, her daughter was finally getting the help she needed. Are you ready for this? Alexander asked softly. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him. In the space of a few hours, he'd learned that his entire identity was built on a lie, that his ex-fiancée had been murdered and that his aunt was a killer. Yet here he was, taking her to see Emma instead of dealing with his own crisis. Are you? She asked. Alexander, your whole world just got turned upside down. My world got turned upside down the moment you crashed into it, he said with a small smile. Everything else is just details. Those are some pretty big details. Finding out you're not really a Sterling, that Sophia was murdered. Alexander was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city rushing past. You know what the strangest part is? I feel relieved. Relieved? I've spent my entire life trying to live up to this legacy that was never really mine, trying to be worthy of a name that was never my birthright. He turned to face her. But Harold was right. Blood doesn't make family. The people who love you do. Isabella felt her heart skip. Alexander, I know this started as a business arrangement. I know we've both said and done things we regret. But, Isabella, what I told you last night was true. I'm falling in love with you. Before Isabella could respond, the car pulled up to the hospital's main entrance. Ms. Rodriguez, Dr. Martinez greeted them in the lobby, his face bright with cautious optimism. Emma's been asking for you all morning. The treatment is proceeding exactly as we hoped. Isabella felt tears spring to her eyes. Can I see her? Of course, she's in the pediatric ICU, room 412. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Isabella became aware of the looks they were attracting. Alexander, in his expensive suit, looked wildly out of place among the tired parents and overworked medical staff. You don't have to come in, Isabella said as they reached Emma's room. I know this isn't really part of our deal. Isabella, Alexander said firmly, there is no deal anymore. There's just us. Isabella pushed open the door to room 412, and her heart nearly broke at what she saw. Emma was tiny in the hospital bed, surrounded by machines and IV lines, but her dark eyes were bright and alert, and when she saw Isabella, her face lit up with the most beautiful smile in the world. Mama! Emma's voice was weak but filled with joy. Isabella rushed to the bedside, gathering her daughter carefully in her arms. Hi, baby. How are you feeling? Better, Emma said simply. The doctors say the new medicine is working. They say I might get to go home soon. That's right, sweetheart. You're going to get all better. Emma's curious gaze moved past Isabella to where Alexander stood uncertainly near the door. Who's that? Isabella felt her breath catch. How did you explain a fake fiancé to an 8-year-old, especially when the feelings had become terrifyingly real. "That's Alexander," Isabella said carefully. "He's a friend." "Are you my mama's boyfriend?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possessed. Alexander moved closer to the bed, his expression gentle. "I'm someone who cares very much about your mama." Emma studied him with serious eyes. "Do you make her happy?" "I hope so," Alexander said softly. "Do you think I make her happy?" Emma looked between Alexander and Isabella, then nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mama smiles different when she looks at you." Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Emma." "It's okay, Mama. I like it when you smile like that." Emma turned back to Alexander. "Are you rich?" "Emma," Isabella protested, but Alexander laughed. "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" "Because Mama works really hard, but we never have enough money, and she's been sad about my medicine being expensive." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, but it broke Isabella's heart. "If you're rich and you care about Mama, maybe you can help her not be sad anymore." Alexander knelt beside the bed so he was at Emma's eye level. "Emma, I want you to know that your Mama is the strongest, bravest person I've ever met. She would do anything for you." "I know," Emma said simply. "She's the best Mama in the world." "She is, and I promise you she'll never have to worry about money for your medicine again." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Really? Does that mean you're going to marry my Mama?" Isabella choked on air. "Emma, that's not... We don't... Do you want to marry her?" Emma asked Alexander directly. Alexander looked at Isabella, his blue eyes intense with emotion. "More than anything." "Good," Emma said, settling back against her pillows with satisfaction. "Because Mama needs someone to take care of her for once." Isabella felt tears streaming down her face. "Baby, you don't need to worry about taking care of me. That's not your job." "But you're always taking care of everyone else," Emma said sleepily. "The medication's making her drowsy." "You take care of me and the other kids at the clinic, and even Mrs. Garcia next door when she was sick. Someone should take care of you, too." Alexander reached out and gently squeezed Isabella's hand. "Emma's right." "Alexander—" Isabella started, but Emma's quiet voice interrupted. "Mama, are you going to say yes when he asks you to marry him?" Isabella looked at Alexander, her heart pounding. They were standing in a children's hospital having this conversation in front of her 8-year-old daughter, and it was, simultaneously, the most inappropriate and most perfect moment imaginable. "I don't know, baby," Isabella whispered. "It's complicated." "Love isn't supposed to be complicated," Emma said, with the wisdom that sometimes came from children who'd faced too much too young. "It's supposed to be simple." "Do you love him?" Isabella met Alexander's gaze, seeing her own uncertainty reflected there. Did she love him, after everything they'd been through, all the lies and manipulation and danger? "Yes," she whispered, the admission shocking her with its certainty. "I think I do." "Then it's not complicated," Emma said, her eyes drifting closed. "Love is just love." Dr. Martinez chose that moment to enter the room, his presence breaking the spell of the moment. "How's our patient?" he asked cheerfully. "Sleepy," Emma mumbled, already half asleep. "That's normal. The treatment is taking a lot out of her, but her body is responding beautifully. I'm very optimistic about her prognosis." Isabella felt a weight she'd been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. Emma was going to be okay. "Doctor," Alexander said quietly, "what does Emma's ongoing care look like? Follow-up treatments, monitoring, that sort of thing?" "Well, she'll need regular checkups for the next few years, and there might be some additional therapies depending on how she responds, but the experimental treatment should handle the bulk of the work." "And the cost?" "The ongoing care will be covered by insurance now that the primary treatment has been approved." The experimental therapy was the expensive hurdle. Alexander nodded, then turned to Isabella. "Can we talk outside for a minute?" They stepped into the hallway, leaving Emma to rest under the watchful eye of her nurses. "Isabella," Alexander began, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Ask someone to marry me for real. Alexander's laugh was self-deprecating. I mean, technically, I've never actually proposed to anyone. The engagement to Sophia was arranged by our families. Isabella felt her heart stop. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking if you'd be willing to consider it. Not because of money or business arrangements or family pressure, but because— He stepped closer. Because I can't imagine my life without you and Emma in it. Alexander, we've known each other for less than a week. I know, it's insane. It's impractical. It goes against every rational thought in my head. Alexander cupped her face in his hands. But Isabella, when I think about going back to my old life, the empty mansion, the meaningless social obligations, the loneliness, I can't do it. You've shown me what it feels like to have something real worth fighting for. Isabella felt herself wavering. What about your family, the Sterling Empire? You'll inherit billions of dollars. Money I never earned, built on a legacy that was never mine. Alexander's voice was firm. Harold made it clear the inheritance is mine regardless. But Isabella, I don't want to be a Sterling. I want to be whatever name Emma calls her stepfather. Tears were flowing freely down Isabella's face now. You don't know what you're asking. Emma and I, we're not your world. We're chaos and medical bills and homework help and bedtime stories. That sounds like the best life I could possibly imagine. And what if Emma's treatment doesn't work? What if we're looking at years of medical complications? Then we face them together. Alexander's voice was absolutely certain. In sickness and in health. Right? Isabella looked through the window at Emma, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Her daughter had said it best. Love was supposed to be simple. Ask me again in a year, Isabella said finally. When we've had time to build something real, when Emma's in remission, when we know this isn't just adrenaline and desperation. Alexander smiled, and Isabella realized it was the first truly happy expression she'd seen from him. I can live with that, he said, as long as you'll let me spend that year proving that I'm worthy of you both. Alexander Sterling, Isabella said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. I think you've been proving that since the moment you defended me to Victoria. As they kissed in the hospital hallway, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the bustle of medical staff, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, hope for the future. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez Sterling, she'd insisted on hyphenating, stood as maid of honor at her mother's wedding, completely cancer-free and glowing with health. Harold Sterling walked Isabella down the aisle, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he officially welcomed her into the family. And Victoria Sterling watched from her prison cell, where she was serving life without parole for the murder of Sophia Blackwell. But that's a story for another day. So, what did you think of Isabella, Alexander, and Emma's story? Give the story a rating from 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next story.